Greetings and salutations, gentlemen of the internet. This is Daniel Midson-Short back with episode 2 of The Changing Man, a podcast and live stream all about the joys and the challenges of being a modern man. And if you are a modern man, then hopefully this show will be valuable and insightful and very relatable for you. I got some great feedback on episode 1, which we released about a week and a half ago, and people seem to really like it. And I'm excited to keep exploring this area of self improvement for men and looking at ways that we can grow and change ourselves to become a better version of ourselves and to impact the world more profoundly. And I want to acknowledge, as always, at the very beginning, even though this show is focused on men, obviously it can impact any gender, and it is still applicable to anyone who is out there in the world. So I hope I don't try to misinclude anyone, but I mean to just talk to men because I think that there's a lot of pain and a lot of struggle and a lot of misunderstanding in the male gender, let's say today, and I want to help as much as I can. So today we are going to talk about a topic that I know I have dealt with many times in my life, and I'm sure if you're a man or a male, you definitely relate to this. And this is the topic of male loneliness. Loneliness amongst men is on the rise, and if you Google male loneliness, you'll actually see the term epidemic of male loneliness or male loneliness epidemic coming up a lot. It seems to be something where a lot of men are really struggling to have intimate, genuine, heartfelt connections in the world, to have relationships and to feel like they have other people who they can depend on and connect with. And that's a tragedy in a lot of ways. And it's actually causing a lot of problems in our society. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of the problems that it can cause, more than to say that we all at some stage in our life have probably felt lonely, know what it feels like, and know how difficult it is to live a fulfilled, joyful life when we don't have positive, nourishing, supporting connections. And as men, we are notoriously bad at building and keeping friendships. I talked about this a little bit last episode when I talked about the 5 different struggles that men have. And one of them was a lack of genuine male friendships. Very often these days, you see a lot of men who are very isolated. You see a lot of men who are very angry, a lot of men who are confused about how to build and to maintain and to cultivate genuine relationships with other men because we're never taught this skill. We don't understand that it's important. And usually it's only when we're completely isolated and alone that we actually start to think, man, how did I get to this situation? So we're going to talk more about that today. I also want to cover 3 types of male loneliness that I have experienced, and I'm sure you have as well in some respect. I want to define them a little bit more and delineate them because I think it's going to help us to understand how we can overcome them as men. So that's another thing that I want to talk about, as well as some of the ways leading into, and maybe this will be a future episode as well, but leading into how we can start to break out of this cycle and this epidemic of male loneliness. Because at the end of the day, it really is up to us as individuals to make the choice for ourselves to do something different and to become a different person and to cultivate and to grow and to maintain great relationships in our lives. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the epidemic of male loneliness, how and why it happens from my perspective and also from things that I've read over several years, 3 types of male loneliness that I think we all experience, and then what we can actually start to do potentially to start to change the way we're experiencing it. If you are watching this live or after the fact and you're watching the video of this, I'd love to get your comments and your perspective as well. If this is something you've experienced in your life, or maybe you are experiencing right now. I know I have it many, many times in my life. Right now, speaking for myself, I'm in a good position. I have a lot of great male friendships that I have cultivated and grown, and that is a real privilege. I know how lucky I am to have those, but it's something I did deliberately. So I'm in this position purely because I've made the effort to get myself to this position. So I think if you're not there yet, there is a lot of hope. So I want to encourage you not to give up and not to feel alone, because we've all been there and we all go through it, and hopefully this will be encouraging. But please do comment, share your perspective in the chat or on the comments of this video, because I'd love to hear your perspective as well about what you've gone through as a man and dealing with loneliness and a lack of friendships. All right, let's get into it, my friends. Let's talk about why men are so lonely. This is something that's really interesting. I got some notes here I'm going to be referring to, some statistics that I've been looking up, and it is actually very hard to get exact statistics of when it comes to male loneliness and this epidemic of male loneliness. The internet is rife with random articles and blogs where everyone quotes all these things, but no one seems to source them anywhere. So it's incredibly difficult to actually find out where these stats come from. But the closest I've seen, which was from a 2022 study, I couldn't see how many people this surveyed, but it came out that 57% of men reported feeling lonely. Now, I would actually, I would venture a guess that that is a little low. I would say it's probably closer to 85% from the people that I've met and the people that I know. But 57% of men were willing to admit, let's say, that they felt lonely in their lives. I think it would be much higher because men are notorious for not admitting weakness or pain or the struggle that they're going through. So the statistics say that 57% of men will admit to feeling lonely in their lives. And another statistic was that 7 to 15% of men have zero or no close friends. Between 7 and 15% of men have zero or no close friends, which is very sad and in a lot of ways very surprising, because you think of all the connections, all the people out there looking to have great friendships. Very few of us have actually found them and found a way to connect. So those two statistics are kind of shocking in a lot of ways. And the other thing that I discovered from a lot of reading was that typically, especially as they age, when they get into the ages of 25, 35, 45, most men have stronger, better relationships with women than they do with other men. The connections with men start to fade away or they start to dissipate, and the only real strong connections they have are with women in their lives. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's great that men are able to have connections and friendships with women, but at the same time, not having those genuine male relationships can be a problem, because it brings out a different part of you as a man when you have male to male, or it's called a homosocial relationship is the technical term for it. So having relationships with people of the same gender is an important part of our development and our happiness and our enjoyment in life. And most men actually don't have that. They have closer relationships with their partner, whether it's wife or girlfriend or whomever, and they don't have a lot of male to male friendships. So those are some of the statistics. And another thing that I want to talk about is, what can loneliness do to a man? This is kind of shocking the more you read about it. And there have been a lot of scientific studies done that essentially loneliness tends to cause, obviously, depression. It causes anxiety. It causes a lack of fulfillment in life and a lack of purpose, because if you're only living to work or to raise a family and you don't have a lot of fun or a lot of connection with other men, sometimes it can make you feel like you don't belong, like you don't have a place in the world and in the tribe, if you like, which was a big part of the way we evolved as a species. So this lack of fulfillment and the depression and the anxiety that comes from being so isolated is a very real thing. And if you look at statistics, the majority of depression cases that are unreported are from men. Women are much more open about seeking help. Men tend to bury it and try and struggle through it themselves. So unreported depression and anxiety cases are actually more on the men's gender side. And I believe that's because of loneliness a lot of the time. They're isolated, they're struggling, but they're not reaching out to ask for help. What this does over the long term is, obviously, it boosts suicide rates, which is a huge part and huge problem. And I won't go too deeply into that here, obviously, because that's a very serious topic. But if you are in that mindset, please do reach out for help. I'll pop a link below for resources for that help if that is something you are thinking about or you have that struggle in your life. But it also reduces health and lifespan. So men who don't have a lot of friendships and relationships in their life, they tend to have a lower quality of health and a shorter lifespan as well. There's been studies done that men who have had a heart attack, who had close friendships, have actually had a much higher percentage of surviving that heart attack as a result of having those friendships and that community and that connection. So it's pretty amazing and shocking in a way that these loneliness problems create not just emotional, but also physical health problems for a lot of men. So it can be a pretty serious, heavy thing, not to mention the toll if people take their own life or things like that. So, what causes men to be lonely? Well, I kind of these are my perspectives, but I've done a lot of reading the last couple of months around this topic as I've been preparing for this podcast and this live stream. And I think there's really two things that are at the core of it. Number one is that men don't tend to think relationships are as important as women do. They don't tend to be as communally minded or as tribe minded. They tend to see themselves as more independent, as more of a sort of a solo figure in the world of forging their own way. And because of that, they don't tend to see the value or the importance of keeping and maintaining relationships over the long term. So that's one of the reasons. The other is that they don't spend time doing it. They're much more likely to focus on solo pursuits, on work, on making effort on themselves, and not to actually focus on the importance and to invest time and energy into it. I read in one of the books I was reading this great idea that friendships are kind of like your Uber rating. If you think about the rating you have on your Uber app for your reputation, it's kind of like that when it comes to friendships. If you don't bother to take any time to cultivate friendships, to take care of them, to think about how you come across to other people, then you're probably going to have a bad friendship rating, the same as you have a bad Uber rating. If you treat people like crap or you don't take care of the situation you're in and you don't cultivate those friendships, you're probably going to have a bad rating. It's the same that you would have with your friendships. So it's interesting that a lot of men, I think the reason it causes them to be lonely is because, first of all, they don't value relationships initially until it's too late, until they're all gone. And then number two, they don't invest time and effort into them. And then the third reason I would say, which has become more prevalent, is technology kind of replaces in a lot of ways the initial desire or urges for friendship. It's much easier to just hide online, to play video games, to dull your senses with entertainment or pornography or whatever it is that distracts you. And once you fall into that habit, it's easier just to keep numbing your emotions and to keep hiding behind a screen than it is to actually go out in the world and try and meet people and build a social network. Once it's already in that cycle, it's very easy to keep going. The inertia has already set in, and technology in a lot of ways really enables that for us. And I'm not saying women don't go through this as well. Absolutely they do. But for men, it's very easy to do, is to hide behind a screen, to live your life online, and to live in this kind of virtual haze instead of actually going out and trying to seek real world man-to-man relationships. So this is all kind of heavy stuff, and I wanted to get this out of the way to begin with because I think that if we're aware of the statistics and the reality and what causes men to not have great male relationships, it can help us to kind of catch ourselves in the act, which we're going to talk about more. Now let's talk about the three types of male loneliness. And this is something that I spent a lot of time contemplating and looking at, doing a lot of soul searching and thinking for myself. And I also ran this by several friends. And it's also been backed up by a lot of reading. I've been doing different books. I've been reading about men's health and men's issues and psychology and things like that. So I believe that there are actually three types of male loneliness that we need to be aware of, and we need to notice if we have them in our lives. Very often men are bad at acknowledging emotions and situations because it just feels like a big mess and there's no kind of clarification of what's going on. So my attempt here is to talk about the three types of loneliness and to quantify them a little bit so that you can understand which ones you have the most and then start to actually overcome them. So, the first type of male loneliness, I believe, is what I would call romantic, or you might call it sexual loneliness. So, people who are missing or wanting a partner in their life, maybe they want to date, maybe they want to get married. That kind of romantic relational loneliness is a very common thing. I've absolutely been through this at times in my life. I'm very lucky now to have a great relationship in my life, but there have been many times in my life where I wanted to have a partner, I wanted to have a girlfriend and to get married and to have a great relationship. And I just didn't have it. I couldn't find the right person. I'd be dating, I'd be not dating, whatever. But I would feel frustrated. I'd feel dejected. I'd feel alone. And this is kind of where that whole incel movement comes from as well. Again, not getting into that whole can of worms, but you kind of understand where that is, this idea that we're missing and we're craving romantic connection and relationships. A lot of people today are also touch deprived, so not getting hugs and not being physically touched because, again, we're kind of isolated, we're hidden in our homes or behind screens or whatever. And so all this kind of plays into it. The idea of not having sexual connection, not having physical connection, not having romantic connection and love in our lives with an intimate partner. This is the first kind of loneliness. And I think it's usually the kind of loneliness that we think about the most when we feel like I'm lonely. If I just had a partner, I would feel so much better about everything in my life. Now, it may or may not be true. Speaking for myself, there's been times where I've had amazing relationship connections. There's also been times where I felt very lonely in a relationship where I wasn't connecting with my partner. And I felt like, man, this is not worth being in. It was actually detracting from my happiness. So it's not always true that a romantic connection will get rid of the loneliness in your life. It can still creep in, even though you're not single anymore. So romantic and sexual and physical connection will alleviate in some ways the sense of loneliness you have if that's the kind of thing you are craving. So I think this is the first kind, is what I'll call romantic slash sexual, a partnership loneliness in your life, wanting to date, wanting to be connected and be in a relationship. The second type is male to male or buddy loneliness is what I would call it. So I'm calling it buddy loneliness. And the idea here, which you kind of probably understand, is that sometimes as a man, you just want to hang out with other men. You know, there's an old meme. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's like, look at this, just a bunch of guys being dudes. I'll see if I can find that. I'll link to it. But the idea is that sometimes you just want to hang out with a bunch of men. You just want to, chat about stuff. You want to watch some sports. You want to have a laugh, whatever. You want to have some buddy time. And very often men are missing this more than ever, especially when you get into your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. The sad fact is that less and less men have those buddies and those relationships and that time with their friends than they used to. My experience of this has been that every time I would get into a relationship, especially in the past, I would tend to isolate myself with my girlfriend or my wife, and I would start to neglect my male friendships. And the friends, the guys who I was friends with would do the same thing because we'd be busy, we'd have connections and friendships with our partner, and so we would neglect our friendship and it would start to fade. When I would break up and become single again, I'd suddenly look around and think, man, where are all my buddies gone? I don't have any friends here because I hadn't bothered to take any time or to make any effort to cultivate and to keep those friendships going. This is pretty common. In Australia, we have a saying that says mates before dates, which essentially means that very often men start to forget about their friends as soon as they get into a relationship. And it's a frustration. We all get annoyed at our friends for doing it, but we do it just as much. We tend to or put second our male friendships, and our romantic or our dating aspirations take the precedence and the focus. So this buddy loneliness is something that is real. And I remember when I got divorced years ago, that was the thing I craved the most. It wasn't that I wanted to go out and start dating some more and find another romantic connection. No, I actually just wanted to hang out with other guys and just get a drink and talk about sports and have a laugh about funny stuff and just have time with other guys. And I think this buddy loneliness is really part of the huge epidemic that we have. I'm going to talk why that's the case in a little bit, but I think it is one of the most important types that we have to acknowledge is this buddy loneliness. That's the second type. The third type of loneliness is what I would call family, tribe, or mentor loneliness. And this is a little bit bigger, a little bit more conceptual, but I think it's something you've probably related to in your life. Human beings, we evolved, depending on your belief system, obviously, but we evolved in tribes. So if you go back, hundreds of thousands of years, most of the world was built into tribes of around 100 to 150 people. There's a lot of science that backs this up. And generally speaking, we knew most of the people in the tribe, and there was a balance of men and women. And we had that family, that tribe, and the mentors, the senior members of the tribe were there to kind of guide us and to nurture us. I think men today are missing this purely because we are more isolated. We work remotely. We're hidden behind screens. We don't tend to cultivate our male relationships, or maybe we don't have a good relationship with our family and our fathers and things like that. It's a whole nother can of worms for another episode. But this idea of family, tribe, and mentor loneliness is a real thing for men. Most men don't have a strong male role model in their lives. They don't have a mentor, someone they can look up to and say, this person is guiding my way. And that's a sad thing, but it's a reality of the world that we live in today, is that most men don't have that. And as well as that, they don't have a tribe, they don't have family, or maybe they're isolated or they're not connected to their family like they once would have been. It used to be that most people stayed in the same city that they grew up in. They probably got married and they had kids, and they used to all get together on the weekends and hang out. And the kind of like classic, 1950s type of lifestyle. After the 60s and 70s and 80s, the world became much more individually focused, and that communal world disappeared. And so we didn't have that same kind of tribal or family connection that we used to have. And along with that, disappeared all the older mentors. If you watch any mafia movies, for example, it's not a good example of a mentor, but you can imagine there's a hierarchy, right? There's the Godfather, and then there's the capos, and then the whatever they are, the soldiers, I think they go down. But there's a hierarchy, and they all follow a system. And so men, in some ways, kind of crave having something like that. I think that's why men love mafia movies and military movies and things like that, because it has the appearance and the image of mentorship and seniority and that tribal aspect to it. And so we kind of resonate with that at some base level, because it is part of our genetic engineering to be part of a tribe and to seek mentors. This is one in particular I didn't really understand until I was a little bit older, that, wow, I need to have men who are around me who are older than me, have walked the path before me and can guide me through life as well. Their wisdom, their temperance, all those things actually kind of wash over me and make me a better man, because I'm around more senior mentor type males. So, this third type, this idea of family, tribal, or mentor loneliness, is a real epidemic in the world today. And it's something that I think as a man, you should be seeking and you should be trying to cultivate just along with the other types. So let's recap those three. So, first of all, we have romantic or sexual loneliness, where you're trying to find a partner and have a romantic connection or dating experience, and you want to be with that person. Number two is buddy loneliness. So, just guys hanging out with guys, doing guy stuff, having a good time, enjoying life together, and talking about male things and enjoying it. And then third is the family, tribal, or mentor loneliness. And I'm sure you can relate to one of those more than the other, maybe all three. I know I have at times, but I think each of us are really craving one of those in some respect. So think about those for yourself and say, okay, which one of those is most important to me right now? And is it the only one? Are there other ones that I'm also missing? Could I cultivate more of them at the same time? Because they're not mutually exclusive. You can actually build all three at once, and you can build them together, which will, I think, enrich your life more than if you just chase one. This is why I think a lot of men, when they get out of a relationship, they go straight back into dating quite heavily, because they've lost that connection and they feel very lonely, and they think the only way to get it back is to find another girlfriend or another partner or whatever. And they don't realize that they can actually lean on their buddies and their friends and their mentors and their family and their community more, and build their sense of fulfillment back that way as well. So be aware of these different types of loneliness, and I think it will help you to overcome it over the long term. All right, let's talk a little bit about what we can do here. And I think I'm going to do a deep dive into this in a future episode as well, because there's a lot of things that I've learned to do to cultivate and to grow and to keep increasing the amount of male friendships I have in my life. As I said earlier, I went through a lot of times where I came out of relationships, especially, and was incredibly lonely. So I want to make sure that, I acknowledge that I'm not perfect here. I'm not a person who's got it all figured out. But I think that if we're aware of it, we can actually start to overcome it. So let's talk about a couple of ideas. First and foremost, I think if you are lonely in your life, it's important to figure out what kind of loneliness you're dealing with. So I just talked about those three types of loneliness, and you can probably relate to one of them. Be clear with yourself that you are experiencing one of them. So say, okay, yes, I am feeling loneliness. This is probably the hardest thing to do as a man, because we're taught to not display or to even admit to ourselves that we're suffering or that there's a weakness inside of us. Being lonely is not a weakness. It's a human condition and it's a need that you naturally have. And that's important to recognize. Just because you're feeling lonely, it doesn't mean that you're weak or you're pathetic or you can't manage in life. It means that you're a human being who wants to have connections and friendships and relationships. It's a normal need, same as hunger or sleep or any other need that you have. But really understanding what kind of loneliness you have as a person, as a man, will help you to start to figure out, okay, how can I seek more of it? So, first is to acknowledge it and to start to delineate what kind of loneliness you have. And to make sure that you're not just trying to compensate for the wrong kind of loneliness with another type. So, like I said before, maybe you're just trying to jump back into another relationship because you got out of one, when really what you need is more male buddy friendships and things like that. Or maybe you need more of a senior mentor in your life and family kind of connection. Don't just lean on one type of relationship to try and solve all kinds of loneliness, because they are different. So, first and foremost, figure out that you are lonely, admit it to yourself, and then you can start to figure out what you can do about it. The next thing is to remember that if you are feeling lonely as a man, that it took you a while to get here. So you didn't become lonely in 10 minutes. It's probably years and years in the making. So this is something that's been creeping up on you, especially if you're now in your mid 20s or maybe 30s or 40s or 50s. You probably are at a point now where you're feeling the loneliness that had been creeping up for many years. And especially if you find that you do tend to lean on technology more and more, you're probably finding that the lack of relationships has been building, or more appropriately, your relationships have been eroding and disappearing over several years. So now you're in this position. It's okay that you're in this position, but realize it took you a long time to get here, and it's going to take some time to reverse it, to overcome this. A lot of the time, we think that, well, now I'm lonely and now I admit it, I've got to solve this problem in the next 10 minutes, or I'm just going to give up. That is not how relationships work. The most trusted, deep relationships take time to develop. People need time to get to know you and to build friendships. So realize the same pace that those relationships that you had in the past eroded, realize that they're going to take some time to build, and go easy on yourself. This is probably the biggest thing that I see, is that men realize that they want to have more friendships or more family connections or find a mentor or even find a romantic relationship. They put themselves out there a little bit. They don't get the immediate gratification of the loneliness going away. So then they say, well, screw this. I'm giving up. I'm going back to my video games. Who cares? I don't need anybody. It's very easy as a man to do that because you're so solution oriented. The key here is to realize it took you a long time to get into this position of loneliness. It's something that happened gradually. And so to overcome it will take time as well. You can't expect results immediately, but you can overcome it if you're consistent and you realize it's something that slowly you want to change in your life. Imagine a huge ship that's in the water, a cruise ship. If you try to just change the direction of that ship, say you grab the steering wheel and you try and jam it to the side, it's not going to move. It's just going to keep going because it has momentum behind it. It's the same with your habits and your behaviors and your relationships. You have to slow things down and then you have to slowly change the direction. It's the same with a ship in the water. If you think of it that way, take your time, go easy on yourself, realize that the loneliness will slowly start to fade and change as you change direction. And then the third thing that I think is important to acknowledge here is that loneliness never really goes away. It is an inbuilt trait that's part of our world and it's part of our human needs. We all have a need for love and connection, for community, to feel esteem and to feel love in our lives. So thinking that you can somehow solve it is the same as thinking if you eat some food now, you'll never be hungry again. In about 12 hours' time, you will definitely need to eat something again, and it's the only thing you will think about. Well, it's the same thing with loneliness. If you are feeling incredibly lonely in your life right now, and I have been there, my friend, it's all you can think about. It's crushing. You think that if you get some friends or you get a girlfriend or you find some mentors or whatever, it will just solve the problem forever. It won't. It will still be there because it's a human need and it's something that will ebb and flow in your life. Realize that you have to have a balance in your life of quality friendships, and you have to nurture those and cultivate those over many years, so that, similar to having food in your house, you can eat sparingly. You're not just trying to, sort of gorge on a huge pile of food, then eat nothing for 3 months. It's the same with relationships and friendships. You want to have consistent, slow building friendships and relationships so that the loneliness evens out. Really important. It's never going to go away. It's just going to be kind of sated while ever you have these connections in your life. The great thing is that other people have this need as well. So if you are a person who is generative, who is planning and making, events for people to join, and you're the person who's leading and actually helping others to find connections as well, not only are you fulfilling your need, but you're also fulfilling the need of a lot of other people. And that kind of whatever you want to call it, collaboration or co-connection actually nurtures both of you, and it sates the need for both people. So remember, it's never going to go away. You don't just solve it in 10 minutes, but it is something, if you nurture it, you get a huge reward, and the other people do as well, and you kind of help each other out. The final point that I have here is that it is up to us to solve this epidemic. So I started off this talking about the male loneliness epidemic and all the statistics and all the things that are going wrong. And most of the articles that I read online and several books that I've read about this, everyone just goes on about how much of a problem it is, and it's a concern, it's a worry, and it's a serious issue in society today. I absolutely agree with all those people, but I think what is missing is that it is up to us, up to you and to me and to other men to decide to do something about this. That's why I'm creating this podcast and this live stream. That's why I have spent time cultivating and building male to male friendships in my life, because I believe it is up to me as a man to develop and to build those relationships with other men and to be a support out in the world. I want to be the change that I want to see in the world. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. That might mean getting yourself out of your comfort zone. It might mean being vulnerable and admitting that you're lonely. It might mean trying some new activities in your life, meeting people, reaching out to people, to plan events, to be a leader in your community, to realize that you have the power and the ability to help and to make other people feel less lonely if you put yourself out first. So I truly believe if we're going to see a change in this male loneliness epidemic, we are the ones that can make that difference. So this is one way that I'm doing it, as well as in my personal life, trying to have more man time and connections, which I'll talk about in a future episode. But for now, I want to plant this seed that I believe as men, we can solve this male loneliness epidemic if we talk about it, if we work on it, and we realize that we have the power to change it. So, my friends, this is the end of this episode. I can see we've got a few people here online watching. I appreciate you being here. A couple of thumbs up. I hope that these ideas have been insightful for you. I really want to encourage you to think of yourself as being in a position of empowerment, of being able to change and to develop yourself, and to realize that even though things are tough, there are things that you can do. And we're going to talk about that in future episodes of this show. I'm going to try to go live every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. So just remember, live at 5 Eastern Standard Time in the US. I believe that's 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and that is 2 p.m. Pacific Time. So if you can, join me every week. I will be here live at 5 for an episode of The Changing Man. Unless I'm traveling that week, then I probably will miss it. But otherwise, I'm going to be here. And I hope that we can build a community of like-minded men online who help each other to grow and to go through self-improvement. And I will bring ideas and topics, but I'm hoping that this live stream is a resource for you if you feel like, as a man, you don't have a lot of means to grow and to develop yourself. So, my friend, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all the feedback so far. And I look forward to seeing you in a future episode of The Changing Man. And until next time, be well, my friend, and live life like a great man.